Live from our newsroom, it's the Hard Times Podcast. With Bill Conway and Matt Sankum.
All right, Anthony, welcome to the Hard Times Podcast. Good to meet you, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. I think the first time I ever heard about you, I was at a show in the little green room, and I think the dudes from Nails or some band your review had just come out or something like that. That was the first time I've ever saw your face. I forget which band it was, but they were watching you review them, and it was a big deal to them what you were about to say.
Was this like Unsilent Death era, or was this like...
This would have been like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. I'm not
Okay.
exactly sure. And I remember saying, like, who is that guy? And they explained to me, like, this is the guy who reviews music on YouTube. And at the time, I was trying to make my way as a music writer, I never really rose to the level of taking myself as like a music critic, but that was kind of my job title. I was a music editor at SF Weekly. And I remember thinking, well, who's this guy who everyone cares about his opinion? Meanwhile, I write something on SF Weekly. No one fucking cares. I can't even get my closest friends to read it.
That's interesting. That kind of blows me away a little bit. So this is this was the Nails boys?
I think so. I think this was a show. Davey Havoc had a new band, and it was
Was it Extremist?
It was Extremist. And I was backstage because I was friends with Toast, who played in Ceremony, and I was playing in a band with Toast at the time. I think it was the Nails guys, or maybe it was one of their friends. But I remember a bunch of people huddling around a little smartphone and watching you, and that was, I think, the first
So it's
time.
like people landing. It's like how the people watch the moon landing at first, as they're all huddled around their thing. But it's for Anthony's.
Yeah, I mean,
review of their
I
album.
think of the Nails guys, and I just think like everyone like
Yeah, they have their long
always
sleeve
constantly
shirts on.
scowling, and like if anything's got like, they don't give a fuck. It's like, hey, I just imagine like someone saying, hey, this Anthony reviewed, and then slap the smartphone out of their hand. Fuck reviews, and
Reviews aren't metal.
I mean, that's how I imagine it. Kind of, you just ruined the facade for me.
But I'm infinitely curious about how you became this character who is able to share their thoughts about music and have people listen. Because I've gone down that road, and boy, did I fail. No one cared. If you Google my name, there's a couple bands where, like, on their Wikipedia, it's like, SF Weekly music editor Matt Sankum said this album sucks or whatever. I'm like, ooh, that's like my only history as like a music critic.
Yeah, maybe that's because like you've boiled them down to it sucks. While Anthony does.
I wasn't good at it.
I'll say personally, even for me, those kinds of moments were and have been super rare. Like I think one of the first instances of that was like I got a pull quote, or at least like a little score or a mention or something on the sticker that they put on the front cover of a This World is a Beautiful Place album. And it wasn't even like my most glowing review ever. Like it couldn't have possibly been the most glowing review that they got for that record. And, but it was like still on the sticker. So I was like, whoa, I'm on a fucking sticker. But like, even despite that, I haven't been, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the ease of not my words being able to be just copied and pasted into a PR email super easily. I'm not exactly sure. Like you have to tell some intern to go like listen to what I'm saying and like type it down verbatim. It kind of seems like a pain in the ass, honestly.
Yeah, it doesn't show up on like Google
but
keyword
honestly,
alerts.
like at the end of the day, that's not really like proof of anything. There's like lots of periodicals and reviews that get quoted like that, and at the end of the day, it's really more about like the fan engagement. It's the viewer engagement. I mean, I guess when I started this, at least the YouTube iteration of it, because the Needle Drop was a podcast and was just kind of a music blog. And I've written for weeklies too. I've written for NPR Music for quite a long time as well, before the YouTube channel took off.
And you worked at a college radio station, something like that?
Yep. Yeah. I joined up with my college radio station the year I started college. Next year I started as the music director, and then I went on to general manage for 2 years. And, it was a good experience, and that sort of helped me land my NPR internship afterwards, which, ended up being sort of a part-time gig for a while, and, ended up being the place where I started the radio show in the first place. And when I started the YouTube channel, though, my goal was to not only attach my face to my opinions in the hopes and in the assumption that, it would make the whole process of giving your opinion more intimate and more familiar, and give people something more to latch onto than a logo or a brand. I sort of felt like things were moving that way, being somebody who up until that point consumed a lot of YouTube myself. I watched a lot of YouTubers. I cared about YouTubers. I followed a lot of internet vloggy, or I guess commentary type personalities, whether they were talking about video games or politics or whatever. And just saw kind of a void for that in the music world, and thought that there could be potential for something like that. Thought that at some point there could be potential for almost like a music-based radio show where people are calling in and arguing with you like it's a sports show,
This is Dave from Seattle, and I want to say you're fucking wrong.
This is
they gotta play Keep It Straight tonight. If they don't play that, then I'm gonna fucking lose my mind, man. It's hey, but I'll take my answer off the air. We'll see you later, Anthony.
Look, don't make fun of it. It could happen. It could work. It could work. But yeah, like a heated call-in aggressive music debate show, I think could most definitely work. But I just ended up kind of going with the YouTube thing because trying to force my way into the NPR bubble wasn't really working. I mean, NPR has kind of improved leaps and bounds in terms of like what it talks about and what it covers since I had written over there. But the types of music I was playing on my show and the type of show I was doing wasn't exactly like super on brand at the time, especially for the area that I was doing it in. Some of the most popular shows that we have over in New England are like, cooking shows on the air, and, historical shows, and just like news talk type shows and that sort of thing. Not so much like, hey, let's jam like all these indie metal and hip hop records and just like kind of see what floats and what doesn't.
So tell me a little bit about when you said you spotted that void. Tell me a little bit about between that time and launching, and how much money did it take for you to get going just in the very beginning? Tell me about like, did you get feedback from your friends and family right before you launched the thing? Did someone say, you know what, I don't know if this is a great idea, and you said, no, it's worth it. I'm going to spend the $500 for the camera or whatever. Tell me about those days.
Yeah, I think, there's such like, the elders in my family across the board are all boomers, which I mean is that prime demographic like QAnon now, you know what I mean? So when I was younger and telling them like, I'm working in music, I'm working in media, I'm, at NPR, I'm here, I'm there, like, I don't know, even though I didn't have as many subscribers as Ray William Johnson or, Philip DeFranco. I mean, PewDiePie wasn't a thing at the time. They all thought it was cool. They're like, okay, good job. You're doing a thing. I'm glad you're doing something, and I guess I'm glad it's related to what you did in school. So, I didn't really get a whole lot of pushback or anything in terms of what I was doing. I think everybody around me saw that I was really focused and was trying and had, a plan B if none of it really worked out. But I think most people had faith that, it was going to go somewhere. I didn't even know where it was going at the time. So
were you hesitant at all about putting your face on it?
Not really, because I feel like I had already put myself on it in a way because, before the YouTube channel, I had already had my name attached to the YouTube, the podcast and the radio show. I had already had my name attached to lots of different, articles or like little blurbs and weeklies and NPR music, song of the day, column piece. So I wasn't really hesitant about that element of it. In fact, I thought it would end up potentially making the thing more successful if it was going to be successful at all. So, I mean, and that's what I was desperate for, because that period of time that you're talking about was from about like mid to late 2007 to the end of 2008, you know, and going that long while still like, you know, all I'm doing at that point to make money is like, maybe I'm getting a column here and there. Maybe I'm, you know, doing some weekend announcing at the radio station, but the bulk of the time, if I'm doing any work, I'm still working at a restaurant, cooking pizza and like doing dishes and stuff. You know what I mean? So that's like really all I was doing.
I lived that exact same lifestyle for a while. Music freelancer and working in a restaurant.
So I wanted it to go somewhere. I was desperate for it to go somewhere. And so as soon as 2008 was over, I was like, I got to try something different. And I was like, let me just try to get on camera and see if that goes anywhere. And I can't remember the brand, but it was, you know, like one of those little, I guess like handheld vloggy rectangle shaped cameras that, you know, it was just like, you know, it was like that shape, you know.
It advertised itself as
it was
it advertised itself as HD, and then you look at the playback and you're like, this is what HD is?
Yeah, exactly. Like the
was it a
quality
flip?
Was not HD at all.
Was it a flip camera? I bought a flip camera and maybe 3 months after I bought it, every smartphone in the world had better video recording.
Yeah. So, I mean, I bought one of those. I think it was $200, you know, 150 or $200. And I just started shooting on that. And I was editing like on my old PC with Sony Vegas. And I was only, you know, doing it as a supplement to the podcast and to the blog at the time. Most of my efforts were still going over there. What I was doing on YouTube was maybe one review every few weeks. And if I did a review, it was usually of something, it was only of something that I liked. So it was only ever a positive review. And there was usually some kind of like silly sketch involved at some point, which is why there's a video floating around of me on the internet, like rapping with a paper bag over my head at the end of you know, an MF Doom review for the Born Like This album. So everything had to have a sketch, everything had to have something goofy or kooky going on. Sketch comedy was super huge on YouTube at the time, so I felt like I was trying to do my own thing but like appeal to what was already like successful on the platform. And you know, miraculously as well, I would try to branch out and do track reviews where I would react in the moment live to the song, but what few, I guess, comments or reactions I would get to that would be sort of like very negative, expletive filled, like harassment of like, shut the fuck up and let the song play, bitch. I was like, I thought I was like, I can't react to it. That's not cool. Okay, I won't react. You know, I won't react to it. I'll wait for it to play. And then lo and behold, reacting would be the thing to do. But you know, having said that, so I was trying to do reacting or track reviews for a little bit. And then I think just for the sake of ease and simplicity, it had dawned on me that you know, the reviews don't need to be that complicated. Just have it be a straightforward review. And I need to figure out a way to superimpose the album cover into my space, because I don't want to just have a fucking picture floating over my head like a fucking jackass. So that's when I came up with the green screen square. And I was like, let me just cut out a piece of green screen and like put it over a cardboard square and then tack it onto the wall. And then it's sort of like in my space as opposed to just kind of putting it over the screen. And that freed me up because every review I was doing up until that point, I had to buy the vinyl and wait for it to come in the mail to like have it or something. And you know, that was I think toward the end of 2009, the start of 2010, when the ball started to get rolling. I think I went an entire year again from 2009 to 2010. And at the end of the year, I had 1,000 subscribers. From 2010 to 2011, I think I had 10,000. And then it just like kept snowballing from.
That's actually a pretty decent level of grinding there, though, just to go from 1 to 10 over a year. That's not, you know.
For that era of YouTube, you know, it wasn't bad for that era of YouTube.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
And also considering that like, you're still talking at the time that there's no music-based YouTuber with 1 million subscribers. You know what I mean? So you're literally talking about building a community from the ground up. you know, and then from there, and you know, not to sort of, you know, write over anybody else's efforts, but there were a few other YouTubers at the time when I had started without knowing about them, had, you know, little music channels as well, where they reviewed metal or hip hop and experimental music.
You crushed them. You sent them takedown notices. You say, get the fuck out of my space.
we were all buddies at the time, you know, sort of like doing our thing. And but eventually, like I said, it became a little community where I think you know, how it went was we were kind of accruing this really young, passionate audience of music fans. And as soon as the summer hit and school was out, there were like almost overnight, like a dozen new, you know, teenage YouTube music reviewers who were like, I'm gonna start reviewing albums. I'm gonna start doing this. So then we had like, you know, someone was like competition in a way, you know what I mean? So, which, you know, was encouraging. It was encouraging because honestly, like at the time, I wasn't stylistically branching out too much. I mean, I enjoyed and, you know, was passionate about a lot of different kinds of music, but I feel like my audience was predominantly like an indie friendly audience. And I felt like that's just what they wanted from me. And so I was just covering those records for the most part without trying to shake things up too much. Having other people in the community talking about other styles of music to me felt like, okay, I don't need to worry about like talking about or covering everything. Other people can do other things. You know, I can just do this thing because this works for me. But eventually, you know, a Roots record would come out and people would be curious about that. A Kanye record would come out and people would be curious about that. Or a Big Boy record would come out and people would be curious about that. And, you know, I was just kind of like picking on these mainstream releases from bigger genres here and there without really doing the digging on the underground or the artistically significant records in those styles. And there was unfortunately kind of a misconception that like, oh, he just hates metal or he just hates hip hop or he just hates anything that's not indie. So then I was like, okay, if I'm going to continue to cover these genres, I have to cover other things in those genres. I can't just be like, you know, whenever Iron Maiden comes out with a new record, which is obviously going to be mediocre as fuck in comparison to everything else they've done, just review that, give it a 6 and sort of let that be my metal review for the year. You know, that's going to piss tons of people off and I'm just going to get, you know, a bad reputation doing that. So, you know, I'm trying to dig into a lot of different, you know, styles and, you know, nice. It was nice at the time to have, you know, labels like 20 Buck and Profound Lore putting out some of their best stuff at the time. It was awesome to kind of have this internet-based renaissance in hip hop at the time, which allowed me to, you know, cut my teeth on the Danny Brown record and the Kendrick records and, you know, the Death Grips records and the Clipping records and, you know, the records of a lot of different artists who, you know, were sort of like building their own left field alternative base in the hip hop world online. You know, it was just like a really odd time. It was just a really odd time to be a part of, I guess.
When I became a music critic, a failed one, I realized very quickly that as a kid who grew up in the punk scene and only really listened to the Casualties, I was maybe not quite equipped to go and critique the symphony, which would be like some of my assignments. And in some regard, it made me a little skittish about the whole thing. But in another way, it was a really fun deep dive adventure because I got to go find out what does make these, what are the different styles of this? And I got to dig and dig and dig. And I learned a shit ton about music in a very short period of time. My editor was a guy named Mark Kemp, who used to be an editor at Rolling Stone. And he was the editor of the whole magazine, but his background was in music. So he would give me all this sort of attention and feedback. I think he worked at Rolling Stone when Hunter S. Thompson was there. And I think he's at least buddies or colleagues with Robert Christgau, is that his name? Like the Dean of Rock Criticism or something?
Dean of Rock Critics.
Dean of Rock Critics, yeah.
He's spoken on me before.
I saw him in your New York Times article just be like, I don't know who that fucking kid is. You know,
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
I don't watch reviews.
Yeah, exactly. If a review's not written down, it's nothing to me, man. It's like, okay, cool. Really forward thinking presence you got there.
Hey, he cares about
Rolling Stone is killing it right now. So, you know, print media has never been more vibrant. So, you know,
when he cares about his medium. Okay. When I'm that old and the kids are having their reviews beamed into their heads through their fucking, I don't know, like
Neuralinks.
Their Elon Musk butt plugs. I'm gonna be like, look, if it's not on
Wait,
YouTube, I don't give
Are
a
those
fuck.
out yet? Because I pre-ordered those.
They're
I
on
haven't-
they're on the way. They're on the way.
Okay.
When they're beamed into your heads through the microchip that they're gonna put in through the COVID vaccine, I'm gonna say nope. If it's not on YouTube, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but all the old people hanging out on YouTube. You know,
Yeah.
my fans know real music criticism happens on YouTube. That VR shit's fake. Yeah, it is really interesting though so I come from that background of journalism, print media, and to see someone create something a far more successful version of what so many other organizations are trying to do, but you were just one dude, and to see you actually create this little media empire amongst yourself when you have, you know, product managers and editorial teams being like, how do we become a digital first publication, right? And they just can't find the traction. They can't find the relevance. I've always found your journey to be particularly interesting. It's like, yeah, well, there's one dude with a little green cutout square, you know, giving his opinions, and he has more cultural relevancy than this huge team of people who are trying to redirect these massive old school media organizations to just have a glimmer of a hope of relevancy. I mean, I think you could argue maybe Pitchfork is the one that still has, you know, some cultural sway. I don't think I don't know, Rolling Stone, do they even review stuff? I don't even know. It's
Occasionally.
yeah, it's like I'm trying to think of like the Fader. Oh, the Fader, you're good friends with them. I think they've got some cultural sway.
Best friends.
Yeah, best friends. I remember there's some article that came out that got taken down about you, which pretty much accused you of just being a member of the internet. As far as I remember, it was you. You looked at memes.
It was more nefarious than that, I think.
You looked at memes, which it pretty much made you a member of the Charlottesville rally. If I'm remembering correctly, isn't that right?
that was basically close to the insinuation.
Yeah,
but everything with that is settled right now.
Yeah.
So no worries with that.
Yeah,
but I get what you're saying. Like it's difficult. I mean, I was at a point where when it started to take off, an organization, you know, that was Pitchfork like. It's not Pitchfork, but an organization that was Pitchfork like had approached me and offered to salary me for far more than I was making at the time on YouTube.
Interesting. How far along were you?
I can't, maybe between 10 and 50,000 subscribers.
Okay.
Maybe on my way to 100,000.
Sure.
I can't quite remember, but it was that early on. And again, it was not like I was not making much on the platform. I might have been probably the furthest along that I was it was paying like half my rent, you know, while I was still like working at the restaurant. And you know, the offer was basically salary you for a lot more than you're making now, move out to New York and just like do it over here. And it was really tempting. You know, I wanted to be out there, but then I sort of took that interest to mean that like, well, maybe this is, if people are willing to invest this much in it, maybe I'm, you know, cutting myself short if I decide to do this for somebody else as opposed to keeping it, you know, if it continues to grow. And I just decided to keep it independent. You know, and the thing is, like,
that's a big decision though, because
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there making similar decisions who have a great idea, but because of the ease at which you can start your own platform on the internet, they see themselves being in a better position to just do that on their own, as opposed to let's give this to some Condé Nast, you know, property and do this for them, you know?
Yeah, keep and own all your IP. But
yeah.
That's a tough decision when you're still working in a restaurant, though.
Yeah, sure. No, it is. But I mean, I've always been somebody who's been trying to play the long game, in no matter what I do.
You grew up in the punk scene a little bit, right?
Yeah. We had a pretty strong, like, you know, VFW scene in CT, a super strong metalcore scene, like tons of bands wanting to sound like Hatebreed. and that sort of thing, because they
Oh,
were
yes.
they were bumping at the time.
I came
And,
from Massachusetts. We're probably about the same age, so I'm sure that we might have been, unfortunately, at the same 100 Demon show, getting the shit beaten out of us or something like that. But
That was Anthony beating the shit out of you. Dude. He had a real militant streak back then.
Right. Yeah. You came in with the guys from Shattered Realm, and I was like, oh fuck, I'm gonna hear it's bad news for me. I don't know if they were a Connecticut band, but at the time, mid to early 2000s, I think they were a Connecticut band, but maybe I'm wrong. Love Lost but Not Forgotten, the screamo type of grindcore band. Do you remember those guys? Were they a Connecticut band?
I don't know if they were a Connecticut band.
Okay.
I can't tell you.
I know I saw him at a Connecticut VFW once, so maybe I just assume that they were.
Gotta get those guys on the pod.
Yeah. Wait, no, they're from like Kentucky. Now that I think about it, they were actually more southern. It's coming back to me a little bit, but yeah, the East Coast VFW scene. You can't. It's either the lights are on all the time or they're completely off, and there's no in between, unless the brand brings their own.
I would say predominantly the shows I went to were lights off. Very much lights off shows.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, did the punk scene, did any of that DIY stuff rub off on you? Is that part of the reason why you're thinking, I'm just going to keep this thing to myself? And then also tell me a little bit about, I read that you had a mohawk back in the day. I don't know if I've seen a picture of it.
Yeah, like in high school and in the start of college.
So tell me about dipping your toes in that scene. Who turned you on to that type of music? Tell me about that.
A friend of mine in high school had turned me on to like a lot of old school punk, and like records and that sort of thing. But I was already going to VFW shows like before that, because I was also into like new metal and alternative metal, and a lot of the bands that would play those VFW shows would play that shit too. Like there were, new metal bands. There was at least a band or two, if I remember, like in the Waterbury scene that were like complete and total Tool ripoffs. And of course, like there were a lot of like metalcore type bands as well. It was really like a mix. I mean, while New England is known for its metalcore scene, like in a lot of towns and in a lot of cities, there weren't so many metalcore bands all the time that you could grab them for every VFW show and have a completely like metalcore, lineup. So it was really like a mix of different like types of metal and loud rock. And so yeah, I was already going to a lot of those shows when I was younger, before I like really even had any kind of conception of, I guess, any musical genealogy. I mean, I didn't really like have that great of an appreciation for what was punk versus what was metal versus what was even metalcore. As long as it was like loud and riffy and aggressive or whatever, I thought it was really good. When I was a kid and I was listening to Slipknot, I didn't have like the ability to decipher in which songs, like, oh, that's a thrash riff and that's a breakdown and that's a this,
So when you had a mohawk, you were more into like Hatebreed and Slipknot, and then you were into like the Casualties, or
that was sort of like later in my high school years. And by the time that I had sported the mohawk, to the extent that I was into punk, it was like outside of the bands that I was listening to when I was a kid in the 90s, it was very much about like the old school stuff. If it wasn't like from the 70s or early 80s, I probably wasn't listening to it. And if I was listening to it, I was either buying it at the record store or I was like downloading it off of Kazaa or Soulseek or something like that. So I was like really using the internet to kind of piece together the genre in a way for myself personally.
And your alt-right philosophies, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, but simultaneously. Yeah, Soulseek is a really interesting platform where it's like, I feel like so many music nerds and so many people who I grew up playing in bands with and stuff, Soulseek was just like this hugely
because you get full albums on there.
Yeah. Or even full collections.
And it was so easy to chat with anybody who had like a really great collection, and you could ask them questions about like, hey, like what are the best like G.G. Allen albums that I could I see you have 5 dozen G.G. Allen releases here.
Which is a cool guy, right? That's a cool dude hanging out in Soulseek with a bunch of G.G. Allen records.
I see you have 5 dozen G.G. albums. I see you have 5 dozen G.G. albums, EPs, splits, and singles. Which ones should I download?
Let me tell you something.
None of them.
This live recording with his speeches in between the songs, this is the one that you want.
Hey, some of the Murder Junkie stuff is really good. Super fucking heavy, super fucking nasty.
My friends and I had
but yeah, it's so like really being into that type of like weird, scummy, obscure punk culture through the internet. And there were a lot of people, I think, who were going through a similar metamorphosis at the time. I mean, I remember going to punk shows, and around the same time that I was like listening to a lot of this stuff, there'd be a band, some local or some out of town band, like all of a sudden they just sort of bust out a cover of Bite It You Scum.
Oh yeah.
Which is like, when I was younger, it's like nobody was covering that fucking song. Like everybody's finding out about this track through the internet. You know what I mean?
Bite It You Scum was a classic. A lot of people were covering it.
Yeah.
It was, for growing up in the punk scene where I was at, it was like Bite It You Scum, Ready to Fight, and like Operation Ivy. Those were like some of the covers that were most frequent.
Oh, and now that you mention it, also what was huge in CT at the time, we had a big and strong ska scene.
Oh yeah.
That came complete with an entire website. It was ctska.com, and they would post ska shows every weekend.
They had forums on there?
They had forums on there. They had
some guy with 12,000 posts being like, you're breaking the rules of this forum. Get the fuck off here, kid.
Exactly. Yes. And some of them were big enough. They were like booking, bigger halls than some of the punk and metal shows were. Mm-hmm. So it was really huge at the time. And there were some.
Were you a Streetlight Manifesto fan growing up?
I wasn't a Streetlight Manifesto fan. It was more like, I'm trying to remember. So I wasn't a fan of a lot of the bigger bands. I liked a lot of the local bands that were coming through, like Folly, or there was this other group that had this weird like concept record where it was like zombies versus some shit, and their songs would be about zombies, and they would sort of like separate the mosh pit so that half the mosh pit was zombies and the other half was some other shit, and they'd like have everybody skank together. It was weird as fuck, but like that was like like what a lot of people were listening to.
I feel like punk and ska lyrics 101 is one song that references zombies and one song that references a riot. I'm just realizing now maybe the best punk band name would just be Zombie Riot, and just be like anything. It was in the 90s. That would have been a hit band. Yeah.
It was such a weird time for like hardcore and metalcore and punk, because in a weird way, a lot of the people who were part of the scene were finding out about the scene online, and a lot of that weird online humor was manifesting itself in the music and in the scene itself.
Right.
And that's when you had bands cropping up where it was like, oh, have you heard of this metalcore band where all they do is sing about being pirates?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, they kind of fucking suck, but like I get the joke. It's like, oh, this metalcore band sings about aliens, or this metalcore band sings about sharks. It's sharkcore. And it's funny because at the time people are talking about it like it's going to be this huge genre that like branches off into 30 bands, and it's like, no, it's just like a meme essentially.
I got really swept up in one of these memes. There was at least a solid 6 months where I wore a bowler hat in high school because I was a huge
you never told me about this.
Wow.
But this podcast
was that like a Clockwork Orange like
Clockwork Orange thing? Lower Class Brats. They were a street punk band that was really into Clockwork Orange.
Wow.
I'm not gonna lie.
You were fashion punk all the way.
I was pretty fashion punk. I may have called people droovy once or twice. I didn't wear a codpiece. No need, brother. It's already sticking out there. You know what I mean?
Say it.
I'll say I was on the flip side. I was very much more on the sort of like the minimalist, pretentious side, more of the Minor Threat side. Like I look at like a Casualties album cover in disgust, and I'd be like, fuck those assholes, fuck those stupid fucking leather jackets, those stupid fucking haircuts. Like I'm looking at Ian MacKaye, like, look at that skinny motherfucker in a t-shirt. That's the man.
I mean, look, so I'm a Bay Area kid, so I grew up, and the street punk scene, leather jackets, spiky haircuts was huge, and I became a part of that. Bowler hats, you better believe it. And then my older brother showed me hardcore. He showed me Minor Threat, Negative Approach, all these other bands. And I got more into that, but I was still a part of the street punk scene. So I would have like a mohawk, studded leather jacket, but then like the paintings on the jacket would say like Minor Threat and Bad Brains. And I was a straight edge kid. Are you a straight edge kid?
Yeah, I was pretty much like a straight edge kid, and I still don't drink today or anything. But yeah, I could understand how it's totally regional because like on the East Coast in the New York scene, a lot of what we did in punk was inspired by hardcore. You know what I mean? And so that means like no matter what branch of it that you're in, you're talking about like boots, you're talking about camo shorts, you're talking about shaved heads, you're talking about t-shirts. It's, there's not a lot of muss, there's not a lot of fuss. It's really more about the scowl and the attitude than anything.
Yeah.
It's you don't want to have, you don't want the jacket to be too big, you don't want the hair to be too big because there's going to be a fight at some point because that's just the attitude of the scene.
Too many fights, dude. Way too many.
The metalcore scene over here is like, a dude like, Finn McKenty, who I'm sure you're aware of, has talked about this, the punk rock MBA, has talked about this at great length, but there's a lot of toxicity in the metalcore scene, especially in New England where it's like,
what? I thought that was what?
Yeah, I know. You wouldn't believe it. But,
in the early metalcore scene, the ideas weren't all the way fleshed out. Okay,
just glad I was sitting down for this news because this is rocking my
world.
A
lot of misplaced anger and angst.
Yeah.
Nowhere else to put it because sort of living in New England is pretty fucking shitty.
Yeah.
So there's nowhere else to put it other than into metalcore music. So
I feel like
that sort of just came out in the scene and just sort of like, the attitude where I'm sure like on the West Coast, everyone was like, hey, cool fucking 15-inch mohawk. Hey, cool fucking jacket with random fucking paintings all over it. And meanwhile, over here, people are just swinging their fists in random directions just in hopes that it hits someone just so they could fight. So, that was how we were doing it.
There was a certain time in that metalcore scene where it didn't even like there wasn't any like pretense anymore. So it's, hey, we're only writing these songs in breakdown. So you start with a breakdown, get to a heavier breakdown, get to the heaviest breakdown, finally one more slightly less heavy breakdown, and that's your song. It's like, so that's all we're doing is breakdowns now, guys. Like, okay, that's fine.
It really did become like a meme.
I grew up in the Bay Area where the hardcore scene was not quite as developed. It was the scene was mostly dominated or at least heavily influenced by a lot of the ska punk stuff and the hyper political punk stuff, Maximum Rock and Roll and their general crew of people. So there was a hardcore scene, but it was very, very small. And being like a hardcore straight edge kid in the Bay Area is like people go like, what's the scene like? I'm like, there isn't one. I know one other guy and a couple people. Every once in a while, we would joke about getting an Edge Day show together, and it's like, okay, there's like 10 people here, one band, like we couldn't even do it. Definitely different vibes.
Yeah, and as much as I appreciated that scene and had gone to shows and liked some of those bands, like during that time in high school and during that time, like early in college, I mean, a lot of my heart was mostly in just music discovery and just listening to as much stuff as possible, and in the weirder side of the indie scene too. I was very heavily into bands like Death from Above and Man and Need New Body, and I was getting into artists like Tom Waits, and I absolutely like fucking loved Godspeed You Black Emperor. Like I was very much into that type of stuff, Neutral Milk Hotel and Of Montreal. And, I was just really trying to get a...
How do you say milk?
Neutral Milk Hotel.
I felt like you had it.
Did I say milk?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Neutral Milk Hotel. But yeah, I was listening to a lot of that. I was listening to a lot of old school hip hop as well. A lot of old school metal music, a lot of underground metal music. As soon as I kind of got this idea that punk was like this obscure version of this genre that I already knew I enjoyed, there must be more obscure versions of other genres that I enjoyed, and just use the internet to discover that. When I was in college as well, I went on a huge jazz binge when a professor of mine at the time said, I bought all these CDs for the jazz department and they're just sitting there in the library doing nothing. And then I just like went over there and I'm just pulling out anything and just like burning 10 CDs at a time and just like listening to them on my commute to school every day and just like trying to understand. You know what I mean?
I gotta dig into your YouTube channel a bit more and start letting you help me with my music discovery. My music discovery is poor. I will find like a
Stopped
single
in
song.
2004.
Yeah, I'll find like a single song that I like. I heart it on Spotify, and then I go to my liked songs and I'll listen to that same song for like 4 or 5 days. You know,
I don't
what I mean?
know if you like, honestly, like I talk to most people my age and that's how they listen to music, or they just like, you know, they hit me up and they're like, hey, I check out your YouTube channel. And I don't know who half these fucking people are. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about half the time. Like, what is this? I
feel like
I found out about a band the other day that sounds like Sleater Kinney, and they're my new favorite group. And I just listened to them and I'm like, okay, cool. You know, do your thing. You know, it's like, you know, I'm mostly like, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to discover music these days. I mean, Bandcamp is fantastic. SoundCloud is fantastic. I mean, anything to sort of get out of the algorithm of streaming services, mostly. But for the most part, like I'm just trying to get into the conversation of what the newest and most groundbreaking and most relevant releases are at any given time. You know what I mean? Which sometimes puts me in a position where I'm not scratching as deep beyond the surface as maybe some people are, or concentrate on a certain genre or a certain style. But, you know, I think that's kind of the downside of trying to cover all the bases in a way, but simultaneously just being one person, you know?
I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm a little confused why you are one person. I feel like you have such a level of influence. I imagine that the business is going quite well because of your general reach.
Well, I'm not, it's one person you're seeing doing the reviews, but I'm not literally one person. I have somebody who I work with as a managing editor. I have 2 people who work with me on my Twitch account. I have, you know, a side editor as well who, you know, works with more, I guess, mimetic videos that I do every once in a while. And I have sort of a main editor who chops up most, if not all, of my reviews, just to kind of boil it down to the things that I'm trying to get across, so I can go over it one more time and sort of pull out the things I don't want to say and refine certain things. So there's definitely a team at this point.
But that is efficiency, and it's letting you do high leverage work, like the stuff that you're best at, and having people help you. I'm a little confused why you haven't scaled a bit more, is what when I look at your thing, because I feel like you have extremely well-known brand, a lot of influence. Probably I'm a little, you know, pretty much when we started Hard Times, it went very well, and then we were able to branch out into Hard Drive, which is video games, which is another huge passion of ours. And it essentially doubled the size of what we were doing.
So are you talking about branching out in terms of like, why am I not talking about video games, or like, why are there not 5 other reviewers?
Both. And why is there, you know, like, I think sometimes like you have.
He wants you to do sports betting. He was telling me earlier, he's just, he wants you to get on that. It's like, hey, are the Packers going to cover the spread?
I guess my feeling on that is I'm not as obsessed with anything else as I am with music. And honestly, music is such a huge multi-billion-dollar industry that is never going to go anywhere, where there's always going to be music, and there's always going to be a conversation and a culture around whatever music is popular and interesting. And to me, like, that's always going to be an interesting part to be a part of, you know? While I understand that there are equally interesting cultures attached to other art forms and mediums, I either am not as obsessed with those, or
that's fair.
I'm not as obsessed with those, or I don't find myself personally to be as knowledgeable on those things to where I would comment on them comfortably. Or I guess I want to maintain the mysticism around those things in a way that I have not maintained the mysticism around music. I mean, almost literally nothing these days surprises me in terms of music. But I mean, I find the genre and I find the medium so special where that doesn't really matter to me, you know? I feel like I wouldn't be happy if I ruined movies for myself in the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know that's like really weird terminology to apply to it. I think that's kind of a rudimentary way of talking about such things, but it's kind of language that people are familiar with. You know, there are people who ask me like, have you ruined music for yourself by critiquing it all the time? Whenever you're putting on a music just to listen to it casual, do you go, that guitar.
That brings me to our next question. Have you ruined music? Yeah.
And the answer is no. I'm not just like in a brainy way kind of over critiquing everything that I listen to, but I guess simultaneously I've always been picky to a degree when it comes to a lot of what I listen to. When it came time to actually have like full control over what it is I was hearing, and music kind of came across my path with ease thanks to the internet, when my palette was limited by the amount of cassette tape I could afford or what they were playing on the radio or MTV. I mean, I had favorites and things I liked and I didn't like, but I didn't really sort of know how deep all of everything ran.
That's a perfectly good reason. I'm gonna drop one little piece. I want to try to convince you one more time. You have an incredible way of communicating ideas. You have a ton of knowledge about how to be successful on this particular platform. You already have a gigantic audience. If you found someone who was as passionate and as obsessive about, let's just say, video games as you are, you could work with that person. You already have the team of editors. You could spin it up, almost no resources. Mr. Fantano, what color Lamborghini do you want? Okay, I just want to throw it out there for you.
I guess when you put it that way, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And also Matt has a couple of video game reviews he wants to show you.
When you put it that way, it does make sense. It does make sense, and it does seem like in concept it would totally work, but simultaneously there are reasons that doesn't pan out that way, for the same reason that like Pitchfork doesn't approach me with like 2 million and just like do this for us. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, like, I'm coming to do this on your platform. It's still giving me more exposure. And at the end of all of it, just fucking leave and, continue doing what I'm doing on my own channel, or start my own channel and, sort of leave you in the dust, because the audience becomes intimate and attached to me, not to you. You know what I mean? Like, after all of is said and done, you're using your platform to kind of hoist up a personality that, you're kind of like taking a gamble on that, because the guarantee is to like, what if down the road it turns out that I'm some cokehead alcoholic with like, a bunch of like weird allegations against me, and all of a sudden it's like, your biggest personality or whatever is like, who's attached to your brand, like all of this shit goes down. It's a really big risk, and it's a really big investment to sort of like bring somebody under the umbrella like that and use your brand to sort of put that person on, in a way. You're
right. Yeah.
On the internet for a long time, there have been all sorts of, quite successful YouTube channels where it's like been dependent on the personality types of like 4 or 5 different people who are all vlogging on the same channel, or all collaboratively doing some shit, and it falls apart at some point because of some drama. Somebody did something that ruins the fucking thing. And, not that I'm against, doing such things in concept, or that I don't admire other people who can pull that thing off. I mean, one of my favorite channels on YouTube that deals in music for a long time has been Dead End Hip Hop. And I love the fact that, are you familiar with them? It's just like a bunch of guys from Atlanta, and it's 4 guys and another dude who's behind the camera who, also gives his opinions on shit too. So it's like, you have these 4 dudes who are all arguing over new releases, plus the guy behind the camera, throwing out his input when he has it. And they just like relentlessly debate all these records, and they're just like all lifelong hip hop heads, and they're all just like passionate dudes who are a little older than me and just like know their shit. And, on some level, I wish I had what they had. I wish I had 3 other fucking guys who I just like knew like this, and before they started all this, they were like all very good friends, you know what I mean? Who knew each other very personally. I wish I had like 3 random guys who I sort of like had that level of bond with to sort of sink everything into, and in the past I have tried, like with personal friends of mine being like, hey, come on for a video, do this with me, do that with me. And, people just have different drives and passions and interests, and as easy as you try to make it, not everybody wants to do what you want to do. It's something that I'm not against doing, and I don't think that what I do is always going to be embodied in exactly the way that it is now for the time that I continue to do it. But bringing on collaborators can be a big risk, and it is hard.
You're worried about the Brock Lesnar effect. Vince McMahon built up Brock Lesnar as a huge star, and then Lesnar left him in the dark. Ooh.
That's
Lesnar beat all this.
Exactly what he was thinking.
Vince let Brock beat all of his biggest stars, right? Pin him 1, 2, 3, and then Brock's like, all right, I'm done. Okay, cool. Well, you just fucking killed my business, bro.
And and again, and that was sort of the mistake on his part, because Lesnar already had a pre-established brand before all of that. His brand and his solvency wasn't dependent on the WWE. And just like, this scenario, once somebody kind of builds up their own audience or their own platform or their own brand, they can just go off and do whatever they're doing. And, the only way to prevent that, and these are, sorts of things that I've been thrown in the past, companies will throw contracts in front of you where it's like, okay, if you leave, you can't do anything in this related field for a whole year or 2 years. And it's like, I don't want to be a fucking dickhead and be like, okay, you can come work with me, but if you decide to, you can't talk about music for 600 days on the internet. And it's
not
like,
even in your personal life. You don't text anyone about what records you like.
If I made anybody sign something like that, I'd want to kill myself. Like I feel like it's one thing to maybe do a contract where it's like, no industry secrets or, sort of like, inner workings of company or whatever. But I would never tell anybody if they decided to stop working for me, like, you can't work for Pitchfork. You can't work for Rolling Stone. You can't edit for this YouTube channel. You can't edit for that YouTube channel. You can't take what you've learned here and bring it somewhere else. You know what I mean?
These are all good and valid points, but I believe you could overcome them. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, probably. It's something that I feel like if I were to figure it out or maybe make it work, I'd need to work with somebody who were to help me manage and scale all of that up, because honestly, like most of the time I'm just consumed with grinding out all the content I am all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like at the end of the day, the only reason all of this is successful is because I've just done a really good job of streamlining my creative process and my content making process so that I'm able to, bust out like several interviews and dozens of reviews and track, and then on top of that, tons of other track reviews and commentaries within 30 days.
Yeah.
And just like have it all add up.
I think you've been able to kind of bring some new life into the true purpose of criticism, at least within our generation and within music. Criticism was an interesting thing where when I went to go do it in an alt weekly print paper, it was so fucking dead and kind of, so I definitely feel like all that, what you said, streamlining, all that stuff is very real. But I also feel like you made it relevant again, which is not a small feat. So I'm very glad to meet you, because you're a really interesting guy, because you did something that I couldn't do. Not to say I tried to do it on YouTube, but I'm very happy for you. Tell people what you have coming up next, what you're working on, what you're looking forward to. You're going to lock yourself down for COVID, or are you going to go get some fucking a big grocery store buy right now, or what?
Going to go try to kidnap the mayor.
I feel fortunate because during all of this, outside of a lot of major artists deciding to push their releases back until all of this shit is over, my job has been mostly COVID proof. But the thing is, it's always about changing and adapting. I mean, the moment that all of this shit hit and I sort of foresaw things slowing down a little bit that way, I had gotten it into my head that like, hey, wait a second, like literally all of these people that I've ever been wanting to get a hold of and have a conversation with, because I've always interviewed here and there, and I find interviews fun and I find interviews interesting. All of these people are just literally locked in their house right now. Let me just start harassing them and emailing them and be like, hey, will you come on camera with me for like an hour and just talk with me? And literally everyone's like, I have no excuse whatsoever now.
They're all attention deprived, right? They're used to being on stage and people cheering for them.
Sure. So, now there's really no excuse. And on top of it, PR people are like desperate for a W. They're like, I can't put you anywhere. I don't have anything for you to do. They're like, I have an interview. Please do it. So, it's been turning out really well. I didn't know that when I started trying to do it regularly this past summer that I'd be landing like a Gorillaz interview, by the fall. You know what I mean? So, it's been a great progression. It's been really fun. People really enjoy.
It's like that meme. They're in a pandemic. I'm in a bandemic. You seen that meme? It's like a guy with a stack of cash.
So I'm just trying to take advantage of the fact that my job lets me continue doing what I'm doing without having to stop, you know, and even though things have slowed down, it has allowed me the ability to talk about some smaller artists and releases here and there, because sometimes I would much rather fucking do that. You know, I mean, sometimes when things are in full swing and I'm hit with a week where it's like Drake's out, Tyler's out, Lil Wayne's out, and it's like every fucking, you know, it's while I
How was
enjoy.
that? How was that Lil Wayne album? I went to a Lil Wayne concert one time, and he made us all put our hands in the air for number 5 because Carter 5 was dropping. But then it was like 2 or 3 years later, it didn't drop. I think it's out now, right? Did you listen to it?
The Carter, if you're talking about the Carter 5, that one came out a while ago, and it was one of his better projects in a long time. But it was really apparent that he had been sitting on the material for a while. So even though some of it was good, some of it was like
reference to Al Gore and Bush and stuff like that.
Yeah, like some of it sounded like it would have fit better if it had come out the year it was recorded. But still, having said that, you know, sometimes I enjoy doing those reviews, and I think they're essential reviews to do. But like when every piece of content you're putting out is so fucking high stakes, it does become a little draining. It is like really nice every once in a while to come back to equilibrium and be like, I'm just going to review this thing because nobody else is talking about it and I think it's really good. Or I'm just personally passionate about it. I mean, the next review that I have coming up, which is maybe the most unpunk thing ever, is I'm reviewing the new Chris Stapleton record, which I love, by the way. I think he's an amazing country singer. And the new songs, I think, are pretty incredible. There's one about his dog that passed away that made me want to cry.
Wait, a country singer singing about his dog passing away? Next, you're going to tell me there's a pickup truck in there.
Country singer singing about his dog passing away.
There are some great clips of you. People clip though like 10 minutes straight of Anthony Fantano dissing on Drake, or 10 minutes straight of Anthony Fantano talking shit about
those
Lil Wayne.
those compilations are pretty popular. I mean, I hope at the end of the day they're just like just driving more people to me.
Yeah, I know it is interesting because they're always on just like some random guy's channel with like 800,000 views, but they are pretty funny. Look, I can't thank you enough for coming by and hanging out with us. I love your channel. I love the comedy that you inject into it. I'm wishing you well. Come back and hang out with us some other time, and I hope to get to know you a little bit more because I'm very interested by your journey.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on, and you guys have a good one.
All right, later,
thanks,
brother.
Anthony. We'll see you later.
Bye.